This story begins about the late 80s. Myself and one of our preachers, Crosby, Mr. Crosby, was out there fishing with me, and we were out flounder fishing. So we loaded up the boat, went out. It was a fairly cool day. Probably the temperatures were maybe in the upper 60s. The low, I think, was quite a bit cool that morning when we started. We went out and we fished around an area we called the docks, the military docks. It's called a fuel depot dock, and usually a pretty good spot. We've been fishing, and bait was hard to catch that morning, and the tide was high, so we ran out of bait. We decided to go across the river. There's a little tidal creek that generally on low tide you can catch bait. So myself and Larry, we went across. We were in a 14-foot little center console boat, real small, light boat, kind of real narrow, had a 15-horse Mariner motor on it. It's the last little area before you hit the jetties and you go into the ocean. So the currents are usually pretty strong there. And smaller boats on a rough day, it's probably best not to go out there in that type of boat we were in. But the weather wasn't rough, the wind wasn't bad, so we were doing pretty good. And we did that. We caught a few baits and decided it was getting about right to go back and start catching some more fish. We turned the boat back, started going across the river, and we hit some swells, because usually I'm watching the conditions of the water, and all of a sudden that wave was on me just like that. And usually I'll even see the ships when they go by, but apparently maybe watching for bait, I just didn't notice the ship come by. I think we made it over actually the first wave, but when we come down, it drove into the second one because they were so close together, and that's what filled the boat up with water. At that point, it was hard to control. The motor was still running, but the boat was so heavy, it was hard to control the steering on it because the waves were back to back from the wake. As I tried to turn it back into the next roll, I couldn't get it turned back in time, and the second roll hit the boat and rolled the boat upside down, capsized the boat. I was with the boat. I was trying to decide what to do. Larry Crosby decided he would swim for shore. Probably a good 100-yard swim, I would guess, to get to shore. In a current, it was running pretty strong going out into the ocean. He started swimming, and he barely made it to shore. In fact, he almost drowned. Had some guys help pull him up on shore. Well, while he's sitting up there and they're, I guess, attending to him, they're not really noticing me out there in the boat. Now I'm floating along the river, headed out to sea. And there's a couple of fellas out there fishing on the bank. As I'm going by, I'm up pretty good ways out there, probably 100, 150 yards. And I'm waving with my hand, trying to get their attention, doing both hands sometimes. And the guys on the shore waving back at me like they think I'm up there having a good time, just swimming along, I guess, I don't know. The boat was real low in the water, and I probably couldn't even see the boat. But apparently somebody had seen that I was in distress, or maybe somebody along the area there knew it. But that was back in the days we didn't have cell phones. And a lot of the Navy helicopters were flying over, and perhaps they may have seen me in the water. They had put out a distress call to the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue. There's one real close to where we were at, and as I'm floating out, I'm just about to leave the bank and headed out into the sea. One of the fire trucks come past me. They get a ways ahead of me, and the guy swims the rope out to me. When he did, I tied the rope off, and they started pulling me in, and they pulled the boat and everything on the shore, and all my stuff like my life jacket and the live little bucket that I kept the bait in was floating. So I went back out and got it. The water was kind of cold, actually, probably in the 60s. And the fireman was saying, "Just let it go, let it go." And I said, "No, I lost everything else. Might as well get as much as I can back." So I swam out there and got that stuff and got back in. At that point, we had to figure out a way to get my truck and trailer down along the beach to recover the boat. And several guys helped me flip the boat over. We were able to get the boat back on the trailer. We survived that because the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue was able to get out there to me. Had they not got to me when they did, I would have hit out in the jetties, and the water gets really deep there. The boat would have probably completely sank. And I didn't have a life jacket right there in hand. I could have probably swam to one, but I was holding on to the rope of what was the anchor of the boat. Had I seen them coming, I could have waited till the swells come by. I could have went up in the creek, but by not seeing them and surprising me like that, it almost was a bad situation. When we went across to get the bait, it was probably 9:30 or 10. We hit the waves, pretty close around into that time. Once we flipped, it probably took them, it seemed like it was 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm sure the way the current was moving on, it was probably maybe 5-10 minutes at the most. I was in the water before they swam the rope out to me and was able to pull me in. Once they pulled me in and we got the boat back and on the trailer, it was probably 12 o'clock. Rescue checked myself and my partner. He was there with them a little bit longer than I was, and cleared everybody to go. We had some help from people. We loaded the boat onto the trailer and had to pull the trailer back up because it was in the sand up to where my truck was, and then once we hooked it onto the truck, we were good to go. So we probably got home, my guess is probably around 1:30 or 2 o'clock, and then the next hour or so we worked on the boat trying to get it where we didn't have any permanent problems. There's a lot of things that's happened throughout the years that if you're on the water, you're going to experience, whether it run out of gas, a blown motor heads offshore before, just a lot of different things that can happen.